All right. Mr. Fiorini, was there anyone else who indicated an interest in that subject? Okay. Questions by members? Mr. Johnston, did you have a question? Okay. Questions? Okay. Motion? I'm sorry, Don.
Yeah, I guess I just like a little bit of response to what Melinda laid out. I mean, again, there is kind of that circular where that funnel gets smaller and smaller, and before you know it, you're so layered that everybody has their goals to mitigate, and the law says you're going to do it.
Again, I think there's a couple of points that weren't, reply, I think, in terms of Ms. Terry's comments. One is that, the priority restoration areas were carefully chosen. And so, for example, in terms of the worry that this would interfere with urban protection programs, these restoration areas don't adjoin the urban areas. And so, we're not going to be interfering with urban levees through the designation of these restoration areas. Similarly, there's none of these areas are along the key freshwater pathway. And so I think there's just an opportunity to work with flood agencies that Linda represents to help them actually understand how the policy works. She's spoken of mitigation as if the mitigation, as I had said earlier, an expectation that mitigation, as it's described in this policy, means you have to go acquire something someplace. And again, the first thing you would do is redesign a project so it didn't interfere with the opportunity. If you had to put a pump in, you would, instead of putting it maybe in the middle of an area, you'd see, hey, could I relocate it so it's outside the area? Or could I elevate it so it's above the area where it might locate it so it wouldn't interfere with the flow of water or something like that, So I think, there's a lot of opportunities to mitigate impacts before you have to think about acquiring another area off-site. Levee improvements sometimes do contribute to ecosystem restoration, but I think to state that they always would, as Ms. Terry has suggested, might not be the case. So I think, there's a lot of opportunities here for work with the reclamation agencies. We've tried to locate these areas quite carefully. You'll recall at one time this policy applied to the entire rural delta, and in response to concerns we had from local governments and others, we've restricted it only to these 5 high-priority areas. This is not designed to anticipate the BDCP so much as it is designed to make sure we've got some flexibility in locating the restoration actions that are needed to comply with the current biological opinions. And when the BDCP comes in, we'll have to think about it.
Mr. Johnston.
I wanted to respond to Melinda. Because, the prior discussion where we talked about conservation being a important goal for this council and for the state in legislation, so we want to facilitate that. So too, the ability to achieve sufficient habitat to improve the delta is a state goal. It's not, in my mind, simply matching mitigation measures to fit particular projects or beneficiaries, but it's an overall essential purpose of what we're doing. And so where we can find areas that ought to be considered and in the long run be available for habitat restoration, they ought to remain available, and individual projects responsive to a particular property owner or proponent's objective or local government's permission interferes with kind of an essential purpose of the law. The compensation is a different issue, and surely property owners are entitled to the full compensation due them. But we would frustrate the overall aim of the law if over time we had the incremental development of
in this
projects that in and of themselves are fine, but create a checkerboard effect that frustrate our greater goal.
Yeah, and that may apply to new projects, for instance. In this case, I'm talking about levee improvements. So it's an existing thing that we now have to modify. It could be it's got a crack in it where it has seepage area and we need to put in a slurry wall. That's considered a levee improvement.
Ms.
that we have to
Terry,
get
the
a permit
statute
for.
exempts operations and maintenance.
That's not improvements.
Well, okay, but you said a crack in a levee.
That's considered a major project.
Well, it is when you change the configuration of the
Good.
levee. All right. I mean,
So let me give one example. Is the one of the areas is it the YOLO? Does it include the YOLO bypass as one of the areas? So that's a perfect example of my issue of the BDCP and how it could be legal for you to require people to mitigate to save an opportunity. Right now, the Bureau of Reclamation and DWR have an NOI, a Notice of Intent, out on that whole YOLO bypass, because that's also known as Conservation Measure 2 in the BDCP. So it's unclear why people that operate and maybe maintain levees in that area need to do a levee improvement project that maybe doesn't fall under the exemption. Are supposed to do more than what they're required under CEQA, or if they're doing a subventions program, so that they can benefit people because they need an ESA take permit. That project, the YOLO bypass, the NOI, if you read it, it's being done because the fishery agencies found they were causing jeopardy to fish at their South Delta pumps, both CVP and State Water Project, and therefore the biological opinions have certain acreage requirements. This is the first project to come out of the thing, and yet you have it identified, and somehow these folks who are not benefiting from that ESA take permit, those are, again, for water export, to continue the operations of their facilities. Our facilities now have to mitigate for that.
Ms. Terry, I'm sorry. Tell me which of your reclamation districts are currently building projects or intensive activities in or next to the YOLO bypass that somehow you think will be jeopardized by this? I
don't know if they're current, but this doesn't apply to today. This is moving forward
the
forever.
come on, the YOLO, Melinda, the YOLO bypass and the Sutter bypass are the two foundational parts of the flood control system for most of this region. And the notion that you don't want to use the opportunity of matching habitat preservation with flood protection for hundreds of thousands of people.
Again, it's a good goal. I'm just saying I'm not sure you've got the finger pointed on whose obligation is to maintain that opportunity area in perpetuity.
What would you
by
want to do?
mitigating.
What would your clients want to do with it?
First, I want to answer your question, which is what projects. So right now, as I mentioned, the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan was approved last year. So right now, our regions, including the Delta, are in the process of creating their regional plans of the projects that they want to be done. One thing that we know about the YOLO bypass is that it's 2 feet over its design capacity at the bottom because it's a funnel. So when you hit that bottom, it's 2 feet over design capacity already. So it's likely that a project could be proposed there for flood purposes. Okay, it's not today. But in addition, as part of that Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, the state will be coming out with projects that it considers system-wide project improvements.
Is this an issue of who pays for the project?
Yeah, in this case, no, it's who's paying for this mitigation in order to maintain somebody else's opportunity that benefits them.
Who would propose the widening of the flood, the southernmost YOLO bypass floodway to provide greater capacity? Is it likely to be a reclamation district? No, it's likely to be the state of California, federal government, something like that.
I don't know what the project will be. I don't know that it will be widening. There's other things that you can do in order to reduce that flood stage. Again, those projects are being planned right now as part of the regional planning process under the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan pursuant to state law SB 5.
Okay.
So again, these are somebody else's opportunity, if you will, that benefit people outside of the Delta, and that's why it's confusing. The goal itself, that sounds right. But it's their opportunity, not ours. It's providing benefit to them.
Well, see, that's where I actually think we disagree.
Okay.
I think it's an opportunity for the state of California, the people, as well as the wildlife.
Well, great. If we get some grant money for our levee project, that'd be great.
Not just an economic model that's a function of trading off one good for another benefit.
Yeah, if we had a funding source to be able to do this mitigation and avoidance and redesign our project for you to meet this goal, all right, then that sounds good, but let that be statewide money, because these are statewide benefits
Well,
that
in
are
the
accruing to
YOLO-
other places.
In the YOLO bypass, of course, that is a part of the state and federal flood control projects. So
Yeah.
those are federal levies built with support from both the Corps of Engineers and the state. The planning that's underway, I believe, is funded by the state. Am I wrong?
The funding for what? The
The
plans?
planning that's just underway now, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
the
So
bond money.
I think that there is a statewide interest in those areas, and it's being reflected in both the flood planning and in these sections. I don't think those are burdens in that particular case that are falling especially hard on
Except
local
for,
RVs.
I just mentioned that that's proposed to be
All
a
right.
habitat
Let's not argue.
project under the biological opinions, that
Okay.
whole bypass.
All right.
Well, 29,000 acres of it, I should say, out of 55.
Okay. Thank you very much.